Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate being here. I'm delighted to be here at the International Public Library Fundraising Conference. My name is Dirk Rinker, and I'm here as a representative of Campbell Rinker, a marketing research firm that serves nonprofit organizations, to present to you the results of a study we just conducted with the conference a couple of weeks ago to identify some of the reasons that people in America are most likely to support libraries. Without any further hesitation, let me jump right in and start to share my screen and get going on some of these results. So as I said, we did a study just a few weeks ago that underscored the national perceptions in America and understandings of philanthropic support for libraries. Why would we do this survey? Well, we wanted to set a baseline for growth. We wanted to look at behaviors for supporting other sectors of American nonprofit philanthropy and library philanthropy, and see where libraries stand in that mix. We wanted to develop an understanding of who is most likely to support local libraries with a charitable gift. Beyond that, we wanted to identify messages that resonate with key audiences. We wanted to understand who those key audiences were. Perhaps they were different from the ones that we had focused on before. We wanted to understand whether there was any correlation between importance and motivation, affinity, any specific segments that emerged from that. And beyond that, we wanted to develop key actionable funding opportunities for libraries in America today. So we worked with the Seattle Public Library Foundation and Carl Bloom Associates to develop a survey that gave us a general understanding, a knowledge of people's sentiment about libraries, their attitudes and demographics. Specifically, we wanted to find out, are they card holders? Is that a key driver of engagement? Do they use the library on site? To what degree do Americans use public libraries? To what degree do they visit their public library online? Do they even know they can give to their public library? We wanted to find out sentiments about libraries and find out what people valued about them without us necessarily providing them the answers. So we asked an open-ended question to develop a sentiment understanding. And we wanted to ask about attitudes. How important are various library attributes or benefits to them? What motivates them to give? Are the things that motivate them to give what we expected, or are they different? So that's one of the reasons we asked the sentiment question, to give them an opportunity to actually dig into that on their own without us providing them answers. And then beyond that, we certainly wanted to understand categorically whether or not Americans of one type or another were more likely or less likely to support libraries. So we asked them a full panel of demographic questions, such as, do they have home internet access? Do they have kids in the household? What's their ethnicity, their gender, their educational level, marital status, income, zip code, all those kind of things we wove together. Of course, we also wanted to find out about age and generation and so on. And how did we conduct this study? Well, we went out to an online panel, which is fairly typical in market research these days. And we used a double opt-in panel of respondents from a company called Dynata, and we got 640 of them or so to opt in from May 16th to 25th. So just a few weeks ago. The response, we were very careful to make this response proportionally representative of U.S. adults for age and for gender, ethnicity, presence of school-age children. It's about 27% of the U.S. population who have kids at home. And the margin of error we get from that is 3.8% at the 95% confidence level. Now, we understand that this survey took place at a unique point in time. It occurred during a time of high unemployment and sheltering at home during the pandemic. And our estimate as researchers is that this would have no impact on their reporting past behavior, although it might have some slight impact on their proclivity or willingness to support libraries in the future. Well, that's unmeasurable. We really don't know that. And we can only measure that with continued testing. just for fun, we're going to be referring to different generations throughout this report, and the generations are tied to specific age groups. You may have heard these generations talked about in the media in the past. For instance, Gen Z. What is Gen Z, and how does that compare to Gen X, and so on? Well, Gen Z is the youngest generation. We didn't have very many of them in this study because they're only 2-year age range. Silent generation donors are 80 plus years old. There were fewer of them answering this survey as well, but we did balance them according to the proportion of Americans who are in that generation now. Millennials, Gen X, and Boomers were the largest groups that we found in the study, and Millennials are the largest generational group in America right now, edging out Boomers by a few percentage points. So what we did is we collapsed the silents together with the Boomers and the Gen Z together with the Millennials. We found that 51% of Americans visit their local library at least a few times a year. And there's a few percentage who visit once every 1 to 2 years, and there's a very slight percentage who've never been to the library. Interestingly, we found that this proportion was much higher among cardholders, and plus 15% for those with school-age kids. So those were some interesting takeaways. In other words, plus 15% means that there were 66%, or 2/3 of people who visited their local library at least a few times a year had kids in the household. And we also found out that 65% of American adults have a library card. They know where it is. Most often, like 97% of them say, yeah, I know where I keep it, or I can get it right now, or so forth. Very few of them say they lost it. This also had a higher proportion of people. Cardholder status was plus 7% among women, so women are more likely to be cardholders than men, and plus 6% among people of color. So people of color are more likely to be cardholders than whites. So those are some interesting takeaways that we found out that were statistically significant from these results. Another thing that we asked them is whether they knew they could support their local library with a charitable gift. And we found out that 51% of Americans did not know they could support their libraries with a gift, with any kind of funding. So, and equally surprising to us was the fact that 42% of cardholders did not even know they could support their local library with a gift. And recall that cardholders were much more likely to visit and engage and use the library than non-cardholders. That makes sense. Millennials were also less likely to know that they could support their local library with a charitable gift compared to Boomers. There were no differences really by age or, by level of income or by people of color. No significant differences exist in those categories, but there were significant differences in terms of being a cardholder or not and being younger age. What did we find in terms of fundraising? Well, in the past, Campbell Rinker has done studies of the American population and especially the donor population about their past support for libraries in comparison to other segments of the nonprofit world. And what we found is that generally support for libraries has historically been the lowest of any nonprofit sector. And we started measuring this way back in 2008. In 2019, the average household giving per year to, for instance, educational institutions was $257 per year. Arts, culture, and humanities organizations weighed in at about $90 a year. And the average annual support for libraries was $14 a year. Well, is that support for libraries stronger or weaker in any given segments of the giving population? Well, yes, it is. Men, as a matter of fact, give the most to libraries when they give. They're less likely to give overall, but to libraries overall. But when they do give, they give more. Regular churchgoers, we found, they give more to libraries than those who don't attend church regularly, or temple or mosque or anything like that. So it's basically anybody who attends a faith service. Millennials are more likely than their counterparts, their older counterparts, to give more. So they give on average 40% more than the average. And those who earn more tend to give a little more to libraries, but the difference, is about the same as the difference for millennials versus the average. Now, from this survey, just a couple of weeks ago, we asked them on a range of 1 to 10, how likely they would be to support their local library with a charitable gift. And we found this curve. It looks like a very weird smile, so to speak, but generally likelihood was stronger than it was weaker. And we found that there are essentially about 36% of Americans who would be highly likely to support libraries if asked. They were highly likely on a scale of 1 to 10, with an 8, 9, or 10 on that scale. How does this look when we look at the various demographic and age clusters and income clusters and so on that we looked into? Well, we found out there were significant differences in the likelihood to support libraries on the basis of being a card holder, on the basis of having children in the home, on the basis of being a person of color. Now, the differences here are significant or slight at this surveying quantity. If we were to survey, let's say, a few hundred more people and come out with this same result, well, it would be significant for the younger generation versus the older generation. This level of difference would certainly be significant at, say, 1,000 people responding or 1,100 people responding. It's slightly significant right now. Where we didn't find any difference was with, for instance, income. There was no difference in likelihood to support from low income to high income. There was no difference in likelihood to support for married versus unmarried respondents, or for male versus female. Those differences in response that you see on the screen were not significant according to the statistical practice that we had in play. So we find it's helpful to kind of outline these differences in a donor profile, if you would. What is the typical profile of a library donor? Well, Americans who were willing to give to their local libraries, we found, with rating of 8, 9, or 10 out of a scale of 10, were much more likely to have kids in the household. And of course, those put them squarely in the millennial or Gen X categories of generations. They're more likely to visit the library 3 or more times a year. They're more likely to hold a library card or to have visited their local library's website. Now, we did find that willing donors appear equally across age strata, across gender, education, marital, and income groups. However, library donors were much more likely to be employed full-time, for instance, and they were more likely to be Asian or Hispanic than other minority or majority populations. And interestingly, and I don't know that this is it's not a huge population, but Americans in the Pacific West were twice as likely than not to be willing donors. And elsewhere in the country, every other region, the ratio is roughly equal. People who upgraded their internet connection during the pandemic, we found there were about 10% of them who did that. They are also more likely to be willing donors than those who were not, than those who were the two groups, those who had upgraded their internet connection were more likely to be willing donors than those who hadn't upgraded their internet connection. So let me, now, if we flip this on the other side, well, who's not likely to be a donor? Well, those who are not likely would be boomers and older donors. Those who don't have kids in the household would be less likely. Those who don't visit the library as often. Those who seldom, if ever, visit the library's website. Those who are unemployed or employed part-time or retired, those would be, that correlates with the boomer and older donor profile, but that's would also be some kind of a marker. Well, another thing that we found was that Americans who are aware of library giving are significantly more open to it. Now, this might seem like an oxymoron, might seem like, just well, of course, obviously, it's me, Captain Obvious here. But we found that 6 in 10 Americans knew they could give to their library, but 4 in 10 Americans, including 42% of American library cardholders, didn't know they could give. That's a huge gap, and that represents an underutilized opportunity for libraries to actually communicate to groups of people and convince them that there is an opportunity for them to give. And another thing that we found is that fully a quarter of those who didn't know they could give were very likely to do so. Now, of course, these findings have little use for targeting or trying to find the donor in the American marketplace, but they're very helpful in understanding what kind of additional opportunity exists to reach out to the people that you already have in your databases, in your files, in the people you know about that are already friends of yours. We did ask a question, an open-ended question about their, what would life be if libraries didn't exist? And the reason we asked this question is for a couple of purposes. Number one, it helps us understand and gauge sentiment among the different audiences. Another reason is that it helped us to gauge whether or not we were asking about the right things that they might consider important or be motivating to give. And in large part, we did find that that we had gauged correctly in developing our list of reasons. And a third reason that we asked this is because we wanted to get an unbiased window into the psyche of the American mind about how they feel about libraries. Here are some of the responses that we got. What would libraries be like if they didn't exist? Well, the people who were positive about this and offered responses favorable to libraries said, it would be odd. It would be a vacuum. It would be weird. People would be less likely to be able to do things that were important to them. It would be like a good friend is gone. It would be horrible. Other words that came out during this discussion and these people responding to this question in an open-ended frame were that it would just be strange, and it would be I would be bereft, I'd be sad, I would be disappointed. Words like that came up frequently. The neutral group, and there was a neutral group who responded to what would life be like if libraries didn't exist, they were much more ambivalent. They were like, libraries haven't been a big part of my life in the past, and I don't see how that would make a difference to me in the future. Then there was a group that was more negative, and they said, essentially, libraries have become an anachronism. They are a thing of the past. And these negative respondents were much more likely to think that there were suitable replacements for libraries in the future. What we were able to do is we were able to code all of these 640 respondents and say, did you respond positively or negatively or in a neutral way to this question? And when we did that, we found that 2/3 of Americans have a favorable view of libraries. And these are not necessarily the same 2/3 who hold a library card. 2/3 say libraries are valuable. About 20% say I really don't care one way or the other. And there was another portion who said libraries are outmoded. We found that positive sentiment for libraries exists even among people who wouldn't give. The neutral or negative sentiment is very unlikely among those who are willing to support libraries financially. And on the other end of the scale, from 1 to 10, where the scores of 1 to 5, where they're unlikely to give, many who say they wouldn't give still respect libraries and still understand the significance of libraries. It's just not in their framework of mind to give to them. So what did we find out about library benefits and motivations? We found when we asked them 13 rating statements and we asked them to respond to these on 2 different perspectives, we asked them, well, why are libraries important? And in this term, we used we statements to show social buy-in. And then we asked about, well, are these good reasons to support? And in this framework, we used I statements to indicate personal buy-in. And here's a list of the 13 statements that we asked them about. And these, as I mentioned, these were a little bit shaded differently for each type of question we asked. We found out that the most important reasons to maintain local libraries among Americans were, number 1, people deserve easy access to information and ideas. Number 2, libraries help children grow to love reading and learning. Number 3, libraries are a trusted source of information, something that is seems to be less and less available in modern society today. Number 4, they help preserve our history and our culture. And number 4, a society is nothing without books. These were the top reasons that libraries were considered important. And when we use the top 2 ratings, somewhat or completely agree that these reasons are important, we found that these reasons were agreed to by 78% or higher for Americans. And you can see here when I put a chart up here that has the likely donor listing, likely donors are far and away more apt to give to libraries for these same reasons than the total American sample was. And another thing we found out importantly is that the sequence of these ratings from highest rated to lowest rated was consistent, really, regardless of what category or slice of Americans we looked at, by income range, by ethnicity, by marital status, by gender, etc., for all the 13 items that we ranked. So why did we discover Americans would be willing to give to libraries? Well, the most motivating reasons to support libraries, and remember, we put these in the framework of I statements instead of societal benefit or we statements. Well, libraries help children grow to love reading and learning. Libraries help to ensure a literate public. A society is nothing without books. They're a trustworthy source of information to me. They help preserve the history and culture I value. And we didn't expect these top 2 ratings to get to the level of importance, but we were pleased and surprised to see that for many respondents, they did reach a very high level. In other words, all these reasons were at least 52% or higher for a combined rating of 5 and 6 on a scale of 6. They were either very or extremely good reasons to support libraries. And again, if we look at the donors who are most likely to give to a library, these same reasons emerge as top for them. 81% of donors would support libraries because they help children grow to love reading and learning, or they help ensure a literate public. A society is nothing without books. They're a trustworthy source of information to me, or they help preserve the history and culture that I value. And again, as we did with importance, we found that the sequence of these ratings, regardless of the category of the American public that we looked at, was similar. What happens when we combine the importance and motivation ratings into one view? Well, here's what it looks like. The motivators and importance ratings among most likely donors show that there is a category here where there's a group of 4 that really emerges most important and most compelling to donors. Kids grow to love learning, ensuring literacy, society being nothing without books, and being a trustworthy source of information. These 4 messages, when presented effectively, should outpace any control that you can, any control appeal or acquisition piece that you might put out. Similarly, there's a group of motivating messages that is a little bit less motivating. People deserve easy access to information. Libraries help preserve history and culture, and libraries are important to help teens research and study. So those are also compelling, perhaps not as much as the top four, but they're also compelling. Definitely the items that were less compelling up here on the bottom left of this screen. I rely on the library personally, or people do. Libraries are crucial to economic growth. Libraries have helped me or helped people overcome obstacles. That was less of a viable reason to support than these others. What the chart tells us is that the items that are seen as both highly important and personally motivating generally deliver stronger results in a fundraising request. And beyond this, we see that Americans still see traditional library benefits as the most supportable. Teaching an early love of reading, pursuing literacy, books being the foundation of society, and libraries serving as a reliable source of information. Those are all critical. Notably, I'd like to point out that millennials saw deserving easy access to information as a primary supportable benefit, and actually it elevated higher within that top right quadrant than any of the other attributes. So if appealing to millennials, that kind of a motivating message would be especially important to them. What did we see just generally in terms of a societal observation? Well, we found that statistically, when we stacked the items that were more personally beneficial compared to those that benefit society more, they rated about the same across the board, except for with women and boomers, non-card holders, and households earning over $75,000 a year, where societal benefits tended to rank a little bit higher. Interestingly, these groups were found to be no more likely to donate than their counterparts. So what we find is the societal benefit versus personal benefit isn't really a valid litmus test for whether or not a message is valuable or not. Another thing we found is that people of color saw libraries as having about the same importance in terms of personal benefits, societal benefits, as Anglo respondents did. Libraries were only slightly more important to minorities as a place they relied on visiting. They were equally important to whites and people of color for helping people overcome obstacles or being a hub where the community connects. And interestingly, libraries were less important to minorities as a place where people of all walks of life come together. So where does this take us in terms of top action items that we might pull out of this research? Well, in our opinion, the study offers significant actionable guidelines for testing and refinement of fundraising practice for libraries. One of the things it tells us is that we should work to fundraise among cardholders. If you're not doing that already, you should definitely work to fundraise among cardholders. Libraries should strive to increase awareness among library patrons and cardholders, letting them know that they can support libraries financially. This is a group of 40% of them are unaware that they can do that. And these are the most likely donors and the most willing donors you could find. And you already know who they are. It's an easy group to target. Furthermore, libraries can strive to create fundraising appeal messages and acquisition messages that are based upon the most compelling reasons to support. And you can test these against your control packages. Furthermore, and this is something that's borne out in other research that we have done, is that millennials and Gen X populations, those that we see as slightly or significantly more likely to support libraries compared to their older generation counterparts, they tend to appreciate and gravitate toward sustainer programs, pledge programs, monthly sustainer packages, and things like that. These types of programs resonate well with younger audiences, and that's a good reason, a compelling reason for libraries to consider how it might build these programs and offer them to the audiences that are most likely to take advantage of them. Finally, and perhaps one of the most important takeaways from this, is that libraries have a store of essentially member data. You know who your card holders are within the American population, and you can easily overlay or append data to their current records that show you what kind of a respondent or what kind of a card holder they are. You could find things about these card holders to tell you whether or not they have children at home, for instance, or what ethnicity they are, or what age they are. And this is important not just for your younger card holders, but also for your older card holders, because as you saw, you know, there's still a significant proportion of older donors who might consider supporting the library. It's not that you wouldn't want to ask them. They're just less likely to do so than the younger donors. Well, what that means is that there may be a pocket or a group of older donors who are appropriate to approach in terms of a planned giving proposal. Or it may be best to isolate boomers and Gen X donors for major gift requests. They're being at the end of or the middle of their highest earning years. So these are things that could be very actionable for a library to pursue if it had this kind of information on those cardholders that it could then leverage and implement toward helping pursue some of these fundraising strategies we've outlined, and that donors and that cardholders and Americans in general say they're willing to do. I'd like to thank you for attending. I'd like to thank you for giving me your time and your valuable attention, and let you know that if you would like to, if you'd like to follow up with me either on email or personally, you're certainly more than welcome to do that. And you can go on the Whova app and you can find me there. I'm registered as a participant in the conference, and you can contact me through there or go to our website at campbellrinker.com and just contact us through that. Happy to provide further information on this study to you. Of course, I'm going to provide this deck so that you can download it and look at it at length on your own. Thanks so much again for attending and for your attention today.
Hi, Dirk. How are you?
Hey, Christina. It's great to see you.
It's good to see you too, friend. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm very glad that we get the chance to talk to you.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was great to make the presentation. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, well, wonderful. So, so let's talk a little bit. Let's have a conversation about everything that you saw. We've got some great questions coming in.
We do.
Want to go ahead. I'm going to be reading these, if you don't mind, from my phone. So, a couple of things that people asked. We've always found that our major donors are our boomers. Is that not the experience that you see with other nonprofits that you work with?
Oh, of course. And as you know, as people get older, as they go through their career and so on, they have more capacity to give and be a major donor as they're older. There are some, you know, there's some Elon Musks in the world, but there tend to be fewer and farther between. I mean, in other studies that we've done, we've found that you know, there's 25% of millennials who are making more than $120,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So it's not that, you know, boomers are the only target, but we do find that boomers are generally a larger target for major donor appeals and major gift appeals. We find that Gen X is coming into the age group where they are a perfectly appropriate target for planned giving appeals, because they're in the age range where they're making end of life plans. It's unusual for somebody who's young 40s to make a will, trust, estate plan, etc. It's more likely for somebody in their older 40s, early 50s, as they get to their 60s, to make that plan. And by their 60s, they typically already have that plan in place if they're ever going to make one. So in terms of planned giving, major giving, your older donor audience is typically the target for a major gift request. And your audience from, say, 40 to 60 or so is typically your peak time for the opportunity for a planned giving request.
Okay, great. Hey, another question for you. When we were conducting the survey, did you ask about political parties or conservative or liberal leanings?
Oh, we did not ask that in this particular survey, but I referenced the results of a study that we did just a couple of weeks before this one, where we found out that if you remember the slide where I had that stack of red bars and it showed that men gave about $25 to libraries when they gave, and the average was $14 and so on. Well, in that study, we did ask about political party. And when we compared the amounts in total that the different political parties gave, I mean, there's about 30%, 30%, 30% who characterize themselves as moderate, as conservative, as liberal, etc. When we compare the amounts that those different groups give, we find that the political, self-perception of a donor typically means that, like, on the liberal side, they typically give about $700 to $800 per household per year, and on the conservative side, they typically give around $1,900 to $2,000 per year per household.
Okay. So another question that's just come in: what can we do with this information to share it more broadly? Could we use it to help create some awareness outside of the library community? Do you have any thoughts on that? And if not within the libraries, within some of the other nonprofits that you've surveyed?
Well, I completely support getting this information out there, and I'm happy to work with others to write articles and try and place articles in the press and even present this deck and with the International Public Library Foundation and the fundraising conference to get this information out there, because I think it's critical to understand, especially these top drivers of motivation, especially these critical reasons of importance for libraries and how the two intersect. That's vital information, especially if libraries are fundraising from a standpoint that doesn't necessarily promote those particular findings at a high level.
Okay. Dirk, I want to really touch on something, and two people asked a very similar question, and it's something that the library world has an issue with quite frequently. So if we are unable to use cardholder data, what have you found to be the best donor acquisition techniques or resources? I think that this could be a further conversation, maybe internally. Let me go really quickly to this second conversation, and this second question, they may tie together. Being able to do a data overlay directly contravenes with the library's privacy policy. How do you recommend overcoming this? In the organizations that you've worked with, have you ever seen them be able to change their policies in order to be able to do additional overlays? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Right. I would say that of course it goes up to the directorial level and the board of directors that the library needs to approve such a change. But I would say that if adding that data contravenes your standards and practices, then it's typically time to update your standards and practices and decide if there are certain structures that need to be changed. And the way you do that is to have the governing board approve such a change, and then launch a campaign to reissue cards to update cardholder data and have each cardholder agree to a new set of terms and conditions. And in that kind of a framework, the cardholder is allowed to opt in or opt out of those new terms and conditions for by which they know they're going to maintain their access to the library.
Okay, understood. Let me ask, so we have one of our Canadian friends asking if you're able to perform something like this in Canada. I'm sure that it would be very useful. Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. We've done surveys in Japanese and Korean, and we've even done surveys in Australian.
Oh, great.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's a new group of friends for us to find.
Right. Oh yeah. We work in Canada all the time.
Okay, great. Okay, so let me just see if there are any other questions that have come in. You know, I just really hear from people saying that there are issues with the card holders. So I think that that's something that we can work to advise collectively. Carl Bloom Associates and Campbell Rinker, we can come up with some advisory tips for that. And I know Jonna has some thoughts on that as well. So I think that those are the main questions for right now. I did want to tell everyone that you can download this survey actually within Whova, within this app. You can download it as a PDF right now. Dirk's information, as he said, is available within the app, so you can contact him at any time. Dirk, as always, we've worked together for 5 years on various projects, and you're just absolutely wonderful and brilliant. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Christina. The feeling is mutual. Glad to be here.
We really appreciate you being with us. We had 200 people on this call, so that was very exciting. Happy to share these results with you. Always looking to provide service to the library community to help grow your mission. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.